on, everybody? This is your boy Jay Rants, and I am back with another tutorial video. Actually, this one is going to be on the Native Instruments Maschine, and I'm going to focus on editing your slices after you've gone through and used the slicing function in the sampling menu of the Native Instruments Maschine. So I'm actually going to show two different techniques today, and hopefully as I demonstrate these techniques, you'll see where they're both beneficial in your workflow. I've seen a lot of great tutorials on the internet, don't get me wrong, but I've also noticed that some of them just don't go deep enough as far as editing slices after they've been made. So hopefully my video will give you that knowledge, and again, you'll be able to apply it to your workflow and make some good music. So we're going to go ahead and get to it just in a moment. Alright, so as you can see, I have a Maschine project open, and the sample came from an old Shaka Khan song that I ran into one night while surfing through YouTube trying to find something interesting to work with. So here's a quick snippet of the beat. Alright, so pretty straightforward as far as how I structured the beat. But what I want to do is really talk about how I manage the samples, or the slices in particular, once I started to put this project together. So I'm going to assume that everybody that's watching this video is already familiar with how to use the slicing function of the Maschine. If you don't understand how to use it, you definitely are missing out on the real potential of this device. But you're also going to probably want to take a look at some other videos before you look at this one. What I want to do is kind of advance some of the videos that I've been seeing on YouTube that are focused primarily on assigning the slices to pads, but then after that you kind of left without any additional steps as far as editing slices after you've assigned them to the pads. So that's what I want to focus on. So what I want to do first, I want to show you all the sample and how the slices worked out, and the first approach to editing slices. So a couple of things I want to talk about is very important. I'm not going to say it's mission critical, but it's very important that you do your best when you take your slices to try to really get a nice and tight downbeat as far as your loop is concerned. So here on pad 1, that's a kick sound. What I don't want is to have a huge gap here and then my kick starts somewhere, my first transient is here. And the reason why is because what that does is it throws off the rest of the slice points when Maschine goes through and automatically starts assigning points based on the length of the sample. Now, there are different methods for getting your slices, but if you're going to just use kind of a, you just want to tell Maschine, give me 16 slices, or give me 4 slices, give me 8 slices, or 32, it's going to do some math. And if you don't have a solid sample at the very beginning, you don't really have that endpoint trimmed off nice and tight, the math is going to still take place regardless of where your transients exist in the sample. So that's the first thing that I noticed that a lot of people really don't talk about. So make sure you have a nice tight downbeat. The other thing that's important, if you're new to this, or if you're having problems or it's confusing you, start with smaller samples. Don't jump into a 16 bar sample because you're going to have dozens of transients, and it's going to be really hard at times to really narrow things down, and the screen is going to be really condensed instead of having your transients appear to be a little bit more spread out visually, which makes it easier to identify certain things with the sample. For example, if you've got a longer sample, you may not necessarily notice that the very start point on this particular pad is a little bit off here. There's a little bit of a gap right here where I'm mousing. And as I zoom in, you can kind of see it a little bit better. Okay, so these are the things that are very important if you want to have really nice tight samples. And if you don't want to fight with your sampler, and that, you know, whether it's the machine or the MPC, you don't want your hardware to get in the way. And the best way to keep your hardware from obstructing your work process or your workflow is to really put in a solid, you know, well-trimmed sample before you get into messing with the automated features. So if you've made it to this point in the sampling process, you actually know how to go into the sampling menu, and then how to go into, you know, from edit to slice mode. You've already won half the battle. So one way that you can edit your slices to make sure that everything is trimmed perfectly between your pads is to actually hit there on the right LCD. When you're in the slice menu, you'll see an edit option. Okay, so when you select edit, what happens is now you have the option to adjust your slice points, or your, I guess, your markers, or whatever, however you want to define these. So I can just make small, minute adjustments to perfect the slice. So now that sample that was in question, I just made a small adjustment, and now when I trigger it, okay, and also at the very beginning, before I even moved this, some of this last transient was selected, and listen to the effect that it has on the slice. So you can start to hear it trigger the next instrument sound. So I don't want that to happen. I want a nice clean end on that slice. So now let's check it out. So I hear maybe the guitar lick starting to hit, but I don't hear the beginning of that clap, okay? Which is very noticeable. So so that's something to also point out as you're kind of working with your slices, is that you really want to have the endpoints to be nice and tight. So I'm looking at pad 6, and I'm starting to see the same thing on pad 6, so I'm just going to move that back some. Let me zoom in so you can kind of see what's happening. Originally pad 6 looked like this. So now I'm going to trim this back, and now pad 6, and now, okay? Now, one thing I do want to point out is that if I make an adjustment in this particular mode, when I'm editing my slices before they've been assigned to a pad, I'm sorry, before they've been assigned to a group, and I'll show you that step in a second because you've all seen that as well, but I'll rehash it. If I make an adjustment to this slice point on pad 6, it's going to also affect pad 7, okay? So keep that in mind. This can make the process a little bit easier, because now if you got it nice and tight at the end, the beginning should also be tight for the next pad over. Okay, so that's the approach that I always use. I try to do it right the first time, so I only have to do it once. Okay, so you can continue to do that throughout all your pads, and as you can see on pad 8, I need to tighten that one up some too, but for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm actually going to leave that as it is for right now so I can use it later, okay? So the next step would be, once you've gone through and adjusted all of your slices, and you've got everything nice and trimmed and it sounds clean, you would just simply leave the edit menu, and on your right LCD, you'll see apply to, and then you just select an empty group. And in my case, I'm going to go with group H. So, and this is a familiar step to everybody. This is nothing new. I want to take a pause for the cause right here. If you notice, Maschine always, anytime you assign your pads to your slices to a group, Maschine automatically tries to lay out a basic loop that plays your slices in the order that they were sliced in. So I've seen a lot of guys online, you know, totally skip over this step, and they have a negative reaction to it, and they say things about it. And I wanted to kind of clear something up here. When you're working with a sample that has a lot of melodic elements in it, like guitars and basses and pianos, what happens is because of the way the slice is chopped up, the notes don't necessarily, they won't sustain between chops, especially when you start to spread things out. So, for example, when I slow the tempo down, technically I'm actually separating out I'm separating the samples quite a bit. So if I were to replay this now, and originally my tempo was at 96, so if I play this at 85, 84, this is what it's going to sound like. Let me solo this group. Okay, and so as you can hear, that is a point of concern. I would not want to use my sample like this in the song because everything seems to be very abrupt and there's all these gaps. Now, here's where this is beneficial to you. Let's say you only had a drum loop or a drum solo and you want to only take out each individual percussive sound using the slicing approach. So you've gone through, you took a 4-bar drum sample, you slice it up, so pretty much every one of the hits in the drum loop is assigned to a pad now. And because of the percussive nature of that particular instrument, the notes don't necessarily sustain for too long unless it's a cymbal crash or a cymbal ride, in which case that could be kind of tricky to work with. But the idea is because the snare hits only, it only lasts for a split second, a kick only lasts for a split second. Now, when you start to spread things out, you don't have that same issue of noticing the chops, noticing the gaps in between your slices. You don't have to deal with that issue. So, for those of you who like to go out and find drum loops off of old records, or maybe you just have a drum set in your studio and you want to get your sounds into the machine, but then you might want to change the tempo at a later time, this is the best way to approach this. And you have the ability to go in and you can change the position of some of the notes. So in this case, let me just move this one up. This was a downbeat here, and I'm gonna move I'm going to play 2 of these back to back and listen to what happens now. Okay, so as you can see, there's some benefit to this. You can actually rearrange the drum parts if you wanted to, just simply by just simply moving some of these different blocks of information around. But again, this is probably going to be best served when using percussive samples and loops. You may be able to get away with it if you have, soloed instruments that don't have any accompaniment to them. You may be able to, rearrange the way some of the notes are played, in particular with chord progressions. I can see using this for chord progressions in particular. So that way, you can change the tempo of a song, and if your chord only lasts for 1 count in a measure, you can rearrange the chord progression. You might not be able to, sustain the notes for too long, but depending on what effects you put on, you might be able to replicate that. So I wanted to point that out because I've seen a lot of guys just, they get to this and they're like, yeah, when you get to the assigned group, man, all this just is messed up. I don't know why it does that, so delete. Now we're going to start flipping the sample. Well, I wanted to take that and point it out that this is beneficial. Don't skip over it because it might actually it might help you out depending on what you're working with. So know your tools, understand what power you possess when you have these tools in your hands, and don't just dismiss something because it appears to confuse you. Do your homework and use it to the best of your ability. So let me get off my soapbox. So now we've got the samples all set up in the arranger window. So each channel has a different sample on it, and I'm just kind of mousing over them, and I'll play them now. Okay, and as you can hear, there are some imperfections, and I want to fix those things. So let's listen to these pads closely. I'll try pad 6. Pad 6 is okay. I think it was pad 8 that I noticed. Okay, so yes, pad 8 has a problem. I can hear another percussive sound starting to initiate just before the whole sample cuts off, and I don't like that. I want it to be tighter than that, so that way when I hit pad 8, I don't have the beginnings of the next pad, which would be 9. Okay, and 9 actually doesn't sound good either. So here's how we fix this. And again, this step only works after you have assigned your samples to a group. All right. When you're up here in the original slice menu, this process does not apply. Okay. So keep that in mind. So back to group H. So what needs to happen, I just simply need to, when I'm at the top level, not at the piano roll, not at the waveform level. Actually, I'm going to the waveform level. So I'm going to hit sample. And while I'm in sample, you'll see that the entire sample is displayed here. This is the entire sample before it was sliced. But I want to adjust certain parts of the samples. And as you can see, as I play the pads, nothing happens on screen. I'm still looking at the same sample. Okay, so here's how we go to the edit menu. So we can either hit edit up here, or we can just press edit on the controller. Okay, so now you can see where each individual slice is now selected on the screen. Okay, actually, let me zoom out just a little bit. All right, so now this kind of looks familiar, doesn't it? Pad 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. Okay, so I'm back to pad 8. Pad 8 was the one that I didn't like. So I'm gonna zoom into pad 8 just a little bit, and as you see, I've got the next transient from pad 9 partially selected, and I want to fix that. So all I have to do, let's tighten up. Well, actually, the beginning's okay. So and on the left LCD, you'll see the start point. You'll see the knob with the start and end point. So keep that in mind. You can do it on screen or on the controller, which I prefer on the controller. And I'm actually going to just move the endpoint back so that it no longer has that transient selected, because that transient is the beginning of pad 9. Okay, so now when I play pad 8, nice and clean. All right, and when I go to pad 9, you know, I have to make a similar adjustment. Now remember, if I'm up here and this is the original sample, pad 8, and I make an adjustment, remember that it applies to both pads. Okay, so right now I'm making a change at the beginning of pad 8, but that same change affected pad 7. Okay, so let's move back and you'll see now pad 7 is tight. Okay, now I showed you that because I'm going back to group H now. I hope I'm not moving too fast for people. One thing I wanted to show you or mention is that when you're at this level of editing, so after everything's been assigned to a group, when you're at this level, your changes, your edits to the sample do not apply or affect any of the surrounding pads. So I can make a change to pad 8. I can tell pad 8, I want you to use all of this, and I'm just gonna trigger it. I wouldn't do this, but okay. And then check out what happens on pad 9. Pad 9 was unaffected by this change. Okay, so I wanted to show you that because this might open up some creative opportunities or give you an additional approach to managing a sample. I don't see how I would personally use it unless there is something that is sustaining. There's a chord or there's a note, an instrument, a voice phrase. There's something that sustains past this pad. Then I may want to trigger it. I may want it to include all of that before I play the next pad. Okay, so that's a possibility. That's the only thing I can think of that would make sense to me. Okay, but it's music. You can do it how the Maschine is a tool. Use it however you see fit. All right, so I'm gonna go through and take a look at the rest of my pads, and let's go to pad 9 because I know there's a problem on pad 9. So pad 9 doesn't start early enough. So we're gonna zoom in just so you can see what I'm doing, and I'm just gonna push pad 9 back a little bit. Okay, and also the tail end of pad 9 was starting to trigger the next transient. So, which in most cases indicates like a drum stab or some type of percussive or instrument stab or whatever. So I'm just going to move it back a little bit because I kind of know the sample at this point and I know what to expect. So now when I press pad 9, and it's tight now. Okay, and let's look at pad 10 now. As you can see, pad 10 needs to be tweaked. So I'm going to move pad 10 back, and I'm also going to, okay. Now, one thing I want to mention, if you notice that as I'm going deeper into the sample, it's starting to become more obvious that my chops are not super tight. And the reason why they're not tight is because when I initially created this loop, I broke my own rule, and I did not really get a nice tight slice or chop or cut at the very beginning of the original sample, so it kind of threw everything off just a little bit. And then there's also the fact that a lot of times when people, like a lot of older records may have had some swing applied to them, so the quantization may not also match up exactly with Maschine. So it's a combination of things. It's just, you know, it helps to understand what may be taking place in the sample so you can adjust to it. So I'm not going to waste any more time going through the rest of my slices, but you kind of get the idea that everything needs to just be tightened up a little bit, and it's just small adjustments, and you move on to the next sample or the next slice. Okay, and when you're done with everything, the cool part about editing when you've already assigned everything to a group is that you don't have to apply anything to any groups or any other pads. All you have to do is just simply leave the editing menu. So in this case, I'm done with the sample. I'm just going to go to my piano roll or to my step sequencer or to my arranger window. And I'm done with that. All my slices, pad 8 is nice and tight. Pad 9 is nice and tight. So that's the nice part about it. It gives you an opportunity to save yourself and not have to go back and repeat steps in the event that you've missed something, or you're in a rush and you overlooked one of the slices or something, and it's kind of throwing your whole routine off. This is just a quick way to go in and make your changes. And again, just to repeat what I did, I went to the highest level of my pads where everything is visible, and I just simply hit sampling, and then I went into the edit tab. Okay, that's all it took, and then I just started making my changes. And then when I was done, I left the edit menu and went back to my sequencer. Alright, so that concludes this tutorial on editing your samples after you have already assigned them to a group on the Native Instruments Maschine. I hope that something here helps you out in your workflow or gets you through a challenge that you might have been experiencing with the machine and you just kind of were stumped and didn't know what to do next. And I also hope that it makes your workflow a lot more efficient, because I can see how people that really are into their sampling, they get kind of tripped up on a sample, and they spend too much time fighting with it, trying to make it sound a certain way. And all it took was just understanding that, understanding the tools they were using and how to get in and edit at a deeper level, especially after you've done like an automated process like applying your slices to a group on the machine. Also, I wanted to mention that the things that I talked about, whether it's in this video or my previous video dealing with sampling, these things do apply to other hardware and software environments. So I don't want anyone to assume that what I talked about only applies to the Native Instruments Maschine. The same strategies and techniques can be applied with the MPC. It can be done in Reason. It can be done on another, a synthesizer that has sampling capabilities like the Yamaha Motif. I'm not partial to either or. I use what's in front of me, and I chose the machine for my own personal reasons. But I don't disrespect the MPC or other hardware or software synthesizers or samplers that are out there. I use what I feel comfortable using. So that being said, think about how you can translate some of the language that I use. For example, on Maschine, it's called groups. That's where where your pads exist. On the MPC, it's just your banks. So figure out how to translate the language, and then you can decode what I just did this tutorial about and apply it to your particular device. So that's really what it comes down to. So it may require you to open up the manual just a little bit. You may need to go online and look at other videos, go to discussion forums. But the things that I just showed you do apply to other environments. Maschine, what I showed you here could apply in Ableton Live. It's just the language is different. Ableton might say, assign to MIDI tracks or MIDI channels, but all I'm doing is just taking a slice sample and assigning it to a note on a piano roll. It's not that confusing if you understand the language that each software or hardware environment uses. So once again, I'm back on my soapbox and I'm stepping off now, but I just wanted to share that because I think for me it was helpful when I started to learn how other applications work, even though I didn't own them at the time. When I understood the language and I could connect everything, it made it a lot easier for me to advance my skill set as a producer. So I was struggling with FL Studio, but then I started researching the MPC, and I learned strategies in the MPC that applied to FL Studio. And then when I got the machine, it all came together. It all made perfect sense. So do your homework, understand how other tools and devices operate so that you can use them to the best of your ability and push your creative limits to a new level. That being said, it's Jay Rant signing off. Continue to lift as you climb.